variety of reasons. Could be an apprentice.
All right, so I'm going to ask you some questions which you may or may not answer, and feel free, and no one should draw any inference from the fact you don't answer them. But in terms of the security check, are you engaged with some of the agencies who specialise around security issues, national security issues?
We are very closely engaged.
I don't need to know any more than that. That's pleasing to hear. What would, if I have a criminal conviction for anything, we'll just start with the anything, does that prevent me from holding a card in either circumstance?
No, it doesn't. I guess the criteria in the Act at the moment, in the regulations, reflect the purpose of the Acts, and the purpose of our Acts is to prevent unlawful interference with aviation or maritime transport. And so the eligibility criteria around criminality is limited, and so it very much depends on the offence. So what
do you mean limited? You mean the seriousness of the offence, or the recidivist behaviour of the applicant?
Senator, within the regulations, certain types of offences will make you adverse for the purposes of the scheme, which mean that at first instance you can't get a card.
So let's just get some examples on that if we can, Mr.
Firearms offences, Senator. Murder is a adverse offence. It doesn't capture every type of criminal offence.
But are these listed? These are scheduled?
These are listed. These are listed
within, or you know, they'll be listed out.
If I could read you some. So terrorism, treason, sedition, espionage or selling national secrets, hijacking or destruction of an aircraft vessel or offshore facility, an armed attack relating to aircraft, airport vessel, port or offshore facility, piracy, assassination, murder, attempted murder or manslaughter, aggravated assault, including the following: whether or not the assaults result in injury, grievous bodily harm, actual bodily harm, that type of thing, kidnap, hostage taking, people smuggling or people trafficking, affray or riot, arson or sabotage. Would you like me to keep going? There's quite a list.
Well, I suppose what I'm interested to look at is two things. One is, you know, scheduling criminal complaints helps because it gives you the shopping list to go down if you find it there. But you know, the profiling of an individual who has demonstrated a long propensity for multiple offences, a disregard for authority that might not be on the list, but you know, tell you something about the individual. There's no discretion there. Is there a discretionary power above all of this?
No, there's no discretionary power.
Okay. So how do you deal with if you're in receipt of information to suggest that a person may well be a threat to national security for some reason, but have no convictions? How do you manage that? Is that just that they just go to the bottom of the pile, and or I imagine you'd have difficulty in explaining your decision to them when they don't get a card? But
firstly, I have to clarify that we don't make the decision around the background check. That is AUSCHEC, which brings together all of the different checks. And when they are taking things into consideration, they cannot take criminal intelligence or intelligence around serious and organised crime into consideration. Basically, people have to be convicted of an offence before they can actually be considered.
Okay, so they could be in receipt of intelligence to suggest that Fred's in a club of people of some sort that are setting out to, you know, commit perhaps an event. Yet that alone, no matter the value of the intel, doesn't prevent them getting a card?
No.
So please tell me, Mrs. Member, before I fly home tomorrow, that there is something else that interferes in their ability to get a card and get into the secure areas, like someone exercises their discretion or falls off the back of the truck into the rubbish tip or something.
I'd suggest if there was significant intelligence about someone intending to do something, there would already be action being undertaken by law enforcement agencies, or if it was in
not necessarily. Some of these things go for years before they can.
If it was of such a significant nature that they were going to interfere with maritime transport or aviation transport, I anticipate, and we certainly have the understanding from our law enforcement partners, they would be taking action.
All right, Senator Forsyth.
Or that currently organised crime associated with an organised crime syndicate isn't a bar to an ASIC?
That's right, under the current
So
eligibility
when
criteria.
I look at things like the murder of Curtis Cheng in Sydney, my understanding is that the the person now convicted of the crime, procured that weapon through essentially gang connections, so organised crime connections. So clearly there's criminal intent in terms of firearms, criminal intent in terms of drugs often, the financing, and yet someone who's got a connection to that is not barred from an ASIC.
Until they are convicted of an offence, that's right.
And yet if we look at the Airbus that was downed en route from Egypt, I think back to the UK, the people who were there weren't necessarily convicted. Well, in fact, the guy they've identified was, but there are many other baggage handlers who had access to the aircraft who wouldn't have been convicted of offences, and yet they had access, and if they had criminal organised crime links or associations, they have every opportunity to actually get access to an aircraft, essentially in an unsupervised manner, to plant weapons, explosives, drugs, a whole range of things. Why? I know the government put forward some legislation on that, but is that undermining the efficacy of the ASICs if we can't ban those people who have those organised crime connections?
At the moment, the legislation that's before Parliament is to broaden the purpose of the regimes to include serious or organised crime offences. Criminal intelligence is not included in that package, though.
Sure, but if we see someone who has that organised crime connection, given what's happened with Cheng and given what's happened with the Metrojet, there's a clear connection there between organised crime and terrorism. Surely it would be logical for that legislative reform to be passed.
If we certainly, if we had an offence that was that had been through a court and there was a conviction and it included organised involvement in some kind of criminal activity, we think that would be a sensible thing to capture in the regime, and at the moment we can't do that.
So at the moment, association, despite the proven connection between terrorist events or organised crime, is not enough, and you're saying that even a conviction for organised crime currently is not enough under the legislation.
That's right.
I think the general public would be right to be concerned about that. Okay?
I've got an old chestnut pony at home. I'm going to brush him off. I think I'm going to travel by pony from here.
So just in respect to